Nearly 3 decades have passed, yet the horror surrounding JonBenet Ramsey's death still lingers like an open wound. On that cold December morning in 1996, a 6-year-old girl who had been full of energy, dreams, and pageant crowns was found murdered in her own home. The questions that followed destroyed reputations, divided families, and haunted investigators who could never quite put the pieces together. Today, startling breakthroughs suggest that the answers were always closer than anyone imagined, and they reveal something even darker than what the world once believed. The morning that changed everything. The Ramsey family's life in Boulder, Colorado, had been carefully built around comfort and prestige. John Ramsey was the successful head of Access Graphics, a company valued in the hundreds of millions, and his wife Patsy was a devoted mother who also guided their daughter's steps in local beauty pageants. On December 26, 1996, just after Christmas celebrations, the image of the perfect American family shattered in ways no one could ever undo. At 5:52 a.m., Patsy Ramsey dialed 911, her voice strained and panicked, telling the operator that her 6-year-old daughter was missing. On the staircase lay a 2.5-page ransom note demanding $118,000, the exact amount of John Ramsey's work bonus for that year. The note was unusually detailed and strangely specific, written on paper from inside the Ramsey home. Police arrived quickly but made crucial errors that still echo in every analysis of the case. Instead of sealing off the entire residence as a crime scene, they confined their focus to JonBenet's bedroom. Friends, relatives, and even the family's pastor moved freely through the house, contaminating what could have been vital evidence. Officers treated the situation like a kidnapping, waiting for the supposed abductor's call that never came. Later that afternoon, a detective asked John Ramsey and a family friend to search the house again. It was John who opened a basement room and found his daughter's small body lying on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, duct tape across her mouth. She had been struck on the head and strangled with a homemade garrote, fashioned from one of Patsy's paintbrushes. The horror of that discovery by her own father was only the beginning of what became one of the most mishandled and controversial murder investigations in American history. The investigation that fell apart. From the very first hours, the investigation into JonBenet's death spiraled into a storm of confusion, mistakes, and public suspicion. Boulder police treated the case as a kidnapping, ignoring the possibility of an intruder still inside the house. When John Ramsey carried his daughter's body upstairs, grief may have been his only motive, but the action destroyed any chance of preserving forensic evidence at the crime scene. Even the ransom note, one of the strangest ever left behind, was handled poorly. Written with exaggerated flourishes and covering 2.5 pages, it demanded exactly $118,000, an amount so specific that many wondered if the author knew John Ramsey's personal finances. Within weeks, suspicion turned inward toward the parents. Police struggled to reconcile the family's calm demeanor with what they expected from grieving parents. Patsy Ramsey's behavior, in particular, became the subject of intense scrutiny. In interviews, she was emotional and defensive, insisting again and again that neither she nor John had harmed their daughter. "Go back to the damn drawing board," she told investigators in 1998. "I didn't do it. John Ramsey didn't do it." But despite her denials, theories of parental involvement dominated headlines for years. The media fed on every scrap of information. Tabloids splashed pageant photos of JonBenet in makeup and gowns, fueling a narrative that blurred the line between victim and spectacle. Talk shows and pundits debated endlessly whether the ransom note was written by Patsy, whether the Ramseys had staged a cover-up, or whether young Burke, then 9 years old, might have lashed out in anger. The case became a cultural obsession, second only to the O.J. Simpson trial in its reach and controversy. Meanwhile, crucial physical evidence was overlooked. A rope found in a guest bedroom was never tested. Fibers on duct tape were linked to Patsy's clothing, but contamination couldn't be ruled out. Police failed to coordinate effectively with the district attorney's office, creating years of mistrust between agencies. By the late 1990s, the investigation had fractured so badly that truth seemed buried under layers of speculation, leaks, and bitter rivalries. For the Ramsey family, already devastated by the murder, the greater tragedy was living under a cloud of suspicion they could not shake. DNA, dead ends, and the shadow of suspects. As the new millennium approached, science began to play a larger role in the case. In 1998, DNA testing revealed something that should have shifted the focus entirely. Unidentified male DNA was found on JonBenet's clothing. It did not belong to John, Patsy, or Burke. Despite this discovery, police continued to focus primarily on the family, leaving the evidence unexplored for years. When the results eventually became public, they added more confusion rather than clarity. Investigators looked at other potential suspects. Bill McReynolds, a neighbor who dressed as Santa Claus for holiday parties, was scrutinized because of his closeness to JonBenet. He admitted she had once given him glitter that he wanted mixed with his ashes when he died, a detail many found unsettling. Yet no evidence connected him to the murder. Another man, Gary Oliva, who lived near the Ramsey home, called a friend shortly after JonBenet's death to say he had hurt a little girl. Years later, he was arrested for possession of child pornography, deepening suspicions. But again, his DNA did not match the sample from the crime scene. Perhaps the most bizarre twist came in 2006, when John Mark Carr, an American teacher living in Thailand, confessed to the crime. He claimed to have drugged and accidentally killed JonBenet, speaking of her with disturbing affection. But his story quickly unraveled. No drugs were found in JonBenet's system, and his DNA was not a match. Carr's false confession reinforced the sense that the case had become a magnet for opportunists, hoaxes, and dead ends. In 2008, Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacey publicly exonerated the Ramsey family, apologizing to John and Burke for years of misplaced suspicion. By then, Patsy Ramsey had already died of ovarian cancer in 2006, never able to clear her name during her lifetime. John, remarried in 2011, carried the burden forward, determined to find his daughter's killer. But the mystery deepened further when new experts suggested the unknown DNA might not even belong to the killer. It could have been transferred from the factory where JonBenet's clothing was made. This raised the haunting possibility that the very evidence which cleared the family might also mislead the investigation. For the public, the line between truth and theory blurred again, and hope for resolution seemed to fade into silence. Breakthroughs in technology and the hidden suspect. For years, the JonBenet Ramsey case seemed frozen in time. The ransom note, the chaotic crime scene, and the cloud of suspicion over the parents defined the narrative. But as DNA science advanced, the possibility of fresh answers grew stronger. By the 2010s, new techniques allowed experts to pull profiles from smaller fragments of genetic material than ever before. Then came a revolution: genetic genealogy. By comparing crime scene DNA to samples in public genealogy databases, investigators could build family trees that led to suspects even if they had never submitted their own DNA. This was the very method that caught the Golden State Killer in 2018, and it offered new hope for JonBenet's case. In 2024, Boulder police quietly turned to Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in this technology. The lab re-examined the tiny fragments of DNA collected from JonBenet's clothing and fingernails. Though degraded and mixed with her blood, they were able to strengthen the profile and upload it to genealogy databases. Matches trickled in, not to the killer directly, but to distant relatives. From there, experts and genealogists spent months combing through records, piecing together marriages, addresses, and family histories. Finally, the work pointed to a man who had never been on law enforcement's radar. He was 62 years old in 2024, and back in 1996, he had been a 34-year-old living just 2 miles from the Ramsey home. He worked for a catering company that had served parties in the neighborhood, including one near the Ramsey's house that Christmas season. He had a criminal record, but only for non-violent crimes like burglary and fraud, nothing that suggested he could be capable of murdering a child. Police quietly collected his DNA from discarded items, a coffee cup, a cigarette butt. The results were shocking. The sample matched the DNA from JonBenet's clothing with near-perfect certainty. A search of his belongings uncovered even more disturbing connections. An old jacket from the 1990s containing fibers consistent with those found on JonBenet's clothing and handwriting samples from employment records that bore striking similarities to the ransom note. For nearly 3 decades, investigators had been circling the wrong targets. Now, with science as their guide, they had uncovered a suspect who had lived in the shadows all along. But the revelations didn't bring relief. They brought only darker questions. The missed connections, and police failures. The discovery of a hidden suspect so close to the Ramsey home raised a haunting question. How could investigators have missed him for nearly 3 decades? The answer lay in a chain of errors that began on day 1 and snowballed over the years. The Boulder Police Department had fixated on the family almost immediately, treating the crime as a domestic tragedy rather than a potential home invasion. That focus blinded them to other possibilities. Back in 1997, there had even been a case eerily similar to JonBenet's. Just months after her death, another young girl living only blocks away was attacked while sleeping in her bed. The intruder slipped into the house quietly, went directly to the child's room, and tried to carry her away. The girl's mother awoke, confronted the man, and watched him leap off a balcony to escape into the night. Terrifyingly, this second girl knew JonBenet. They had danced together at the same studio. Yet police never treated the 2 crimes as connected, and they even discarded crucial evidence like the girl's bedsheets that could have preserved DNA. Inside the Ramsey investigation itself, other missteps compounded the failure. Detectives allowed John and Patsy to be interviewed together instead of separately, violating basic protocol. The ransom note, written on paper from inside the house, was analyzed by multiple experts who could not agree on whether Patsy had written it, leaving the question permanently clouded. The garrote, suitcase, rope, and blanket connected to the crime scene were stored away, but never fully tested with modern methods, even as technology advanced. Meanwhile, tensions between Boulder police and the district attorney's office made cooperation nearly impossible. Each side accused the other of mishandling the case. Prosecutors at one point convened a grand jury, which voted to indict the Ramseys on child abuse resulting in death, but the DA refused to sign the charges, citing insufficient evidence. That decision kept suspicion alive for years, leaving the family both grieving and under constant public attack. Now, looking back, the failures feel unbearable. A suspect who lived minutes away, who worked in the neighborhood, who could have been questioned in the days after the murder, slipped away unnoticed. Every misstep, from a contaminated crime scene to ignored connections, allowed him to disappear into anonymity. And while the case dragged on, JonBenet's memory was buried under speculation, leaving her family isolated and vilified. John Ramsey's fight for justice and the final push for truth. Nearly 30 years after the tragedy, John Ramsey, now in his 80s, remains the most determined voice demanding justice for his daughter. He has remarried, but the weight of JonBenet's murder has never lifted. In interviews, he has described how every holiday season revives the pain. Every new headline reminds him of what was lost. Identifying the killer, he has said, isn't going to change my life at this point, but it will change the lives of my children and grandchildren. For John, the case has never been about his own reputation, though suspicion against him and Patsy defined much of the public conversation. Instead, it is about finally clearing the family name in the eyes of the world and making sure JonBenet is remembered as a little girl full of laughter, not as a tabloid mystery. He has pushed investigators to embrace the newest technologies, to release evidence for independent testing, and to use genetic genealogy in the same way other cold cases have been solved. In late 2024, John spoke openly about 7 items from the crime scene that he believes could still hold the answers. The garrote used to strangle his daughter, the suitcase found in the basement, the rope from the guest bedroom, and the blanket that covered her. He insists that these items, tested with the tools available today, could yield new DNA evidence. Police, however, maintain that nothing has been overlooked. The Boulder Police Department has publicly denied claims of neglect, insisting they are pursuing every lead. Yet critics point to a long history of missed opportunities, discarded evidence, and tunnel vision that delayed the truth for decades. Even as age and time weigh heavily, John Ramsey continues to advocate not only for his daughter, but for all families of homicide victims. He has pushed for the Homicide Victims' Families' Rights Act, which would allow families to demand federal reviews of cold cases when local investigations stall. For him, it is about more than JonBenet. It is about ensuring no other family endures the same decades of unanswered questions. Today, with a suspect identified through DNA genealogy, and with pressure building on authorities to act, the case stands at a crossroads. The horror of what happened to JonBenet Ramsey may finally be understood in full. But the revelations, instead of closing the wound, have exposed just how badly the system failed. Not only a little girl, but an entire family, and a nation that watched in shock. After all these years, the mystery that haunted Boulder and the world may finally be unraveling, but at a cost far greater than anyone imagined. Do you think justice will truly be served in JonBenet Ramsey's case at last? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that still haunt us today.